To weigh in on the controversial legislation, Democrats are hoping to ram through former Georgia Congressman Doug Collins, host of the new radio show, The Doug Collins Show, on 1690 WMLB in Georgia and parts of Virginia. Congressman, thanks so much for being here. We knew that, you're a talker, man. We knew that you weren't going to stay quiet just because you were out of Congress. Congratulations on the radio show. That's terrific. And great to have you here. Vice President Kamala Harris broke that tie vote to advance this spendorama to the floor debate. This is, at this point, Doug, it's kind of like throwing money from a helicopter, isn't it?
Well, it's probably worse than that when you actually look at it, because I mean, it's at least in the helicopter, it probably would at least land on some people who could actually, do some good with it. This is just a wish list, a jar full of candy that everybody just sort of put their little piece of candy in, going along. But this is why, and I talk to conservatives all the time. Having Kamala Harris is right there on the screen breaking that vote. This is why elections have consequences. And instead of helping people, this is the part that I want to get across to folks, is instead of helping people, working with our education system, working with our states to get our businesses back open, our kids back in school, making sure our hospitals are doing what they need to do to deal with COVID, we're dealing with a lot of just excess stuff here as well. So, that's what is very frustrating when you see this happen. And, for me, I thank you for the radio show host. My wife was glad that I now have somebody else to talk to every day. So it provides an interesting perspective.
Doug, one of the things that is really concerning about this bill is that, they call it a COVID relief package. They call it the American Rescue Plan. They call it a stimulus bill. But this is really, and I wrote a column about this in the Washington Times a couple of weeks ago. There was something in the Wall Street Journal about it this week, too, that this is sort of like UBI, Universal Basic Income Light. It's going to add millions of people to the government dole and disincentivize work.
And that's the heart of the liberal message. And I'm so glad you picked up on that and brought that up. We get lost in the, it's going to these kind of language programs, these kind of things, which all need to be spotted in this bill and talked about. I'm glad Ron Johnson made it get read to the entire world last night. But what you're doing is a policy difference. And this is where Democrats are trying their best to disguise their policy agenda in these kind of, quote, feel-good bills or helpful bills. But what they're doing is exactly, you're decentralizing work, you're making people get income for doing nothing. We saw how that affected the recovery last year, especially even in states that were opening up like Georgia and others. We were having trouble getting people to come back to work because the question is, if you lump on top of a normal unemployment insurance from the state and then you put $600 on top of that, a lot of these people were making more money staying at home than they were working. And, sort of in a sense, how would you blame them for not coming back? But this is the insidious thing that's going on with the liberals right now. It's a backdoor attempt, either through the education system or through the workplace, to say, we want you dependent on one entity, the federal government.
All right. And let's talk about another power grab, H.R. 1, the so-called For the People Act. Or as I think one of your former colleagues put it, the Democrat Politician Protection Act. The sweeping voting reform bill already passed the House, and it's awaiting a vote in the Senate. Republicans obviously complete opposition to it, likely some Democrats as well, because this is a really, really sweeping overhaul of elections that would allow the Democrats to put their thumb on the scale permanently. Being from Georgia, you've seen how activists try to put their finger on the scale in an election. Your thoughts on H.R. 1?
H.R. 1 is the same, basically the boondoggle that they had last time. I mean, they're coming up with ways to federalize our elections. Look, the Constitution is very clear. It puts the states in the primary role of our election process. The federal government's only real role is to actually deal in areas of voting and making sure, like minorities voting, making sure the bigger issues. But the time, place, and manner is designated to the states. What the Democrats don't like is that they want to continue the pandemic. As the old saying goes, Rahm Emanuel's quote, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, they're not letting this crisis go to waste to make fundamental changes in how people vote. look, I'm a Republican that believes that we have the best message. I want everybody to get out there and hear our message and go to vote. But what we don't need is to continue a process in which there's no accountability and no way to actually focus on the real issues of voting. And that's what this does. But also, it's not just a Democrat Politician Protection Act. It's a consultant full employment act, because you're going to get federal money to run campaigns with. I mean, and I love this because Democrats, you said, had trouble with it. They did. They had to have a couple of their members go to them and say, we need an opt-out provision so that we don't get hammered back in our own districts, or we need to make sure that it comes, and this is really something the listeners understand, instead of it coming from, quote, taxpayer dollars, what they're going to do is say it's going to come from corporate and financial service fees. This is another liberal trick. They don't want you to know it's coming from one pocket. They're going to take it out of the pockets of businesses. So you're going to see an activist federal regime that is going to be fining businesses and fining these financial service institutes to fund these accounts if it ever got passed, the federalization. But that's probably the one that bothers me the most, is this continual, gradual, in some cases much faster, a continuation of the federal government taking more and more power. Federalism is not dead in this country. We've got to realize that the states have roles, the federal government has roles, and we're not looking for one unigovernment here. But that's what liberals want, because if they can control it, that's how in one government, it's much easier than to have to go to 50 states and try and fix it there.
Yeah, we live in a republic. A lot of people don't, on the Democratic side, do not appreciate that because of their socialist underpinnings. I want to move on. Former President Trump fired back at the Wall Street Journal editorial board for calling on Republicans to abandon him, and then he blamed his GOP critics for the party's Georgia Senate losses. In a statement he released yesterday, the former president said, the Wall Street Journal editorial page continues to knowingly to fight for globalist policies such as bad trade deals, open borders, and endless wars that favor other countries and sell out our great American workers. And they fight for rhinos that have so badly hurt the Republican Party. And that's where they are, and that's where they always will be. Fortunately, nobody cares much about the Wall Street Journal editorial board anymore. They've lost great credibility. He then goes on to do this broadside against Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, other GOP officials in the state. He hits Mitch McConnell and his refusal to push for $2,000 checks. He blames him for the loss. Doug, there's a lot in here, okay, and we can talk about each component of this, but more importantly, are you concerned that these continued broadsides like this against Republicans in Georgia specifically will continue to decrease turnout or depress poll numbers and could jeopardize Republican control of the statewide offices and the state legislature, or the ability to win back the Warnock seat in 2022?
I think it's a balance, Tom, and I think this is the interesting thing. Number one, let me just say this. Now that the president, after CPAC and some of these messages that he's been sending out from his office now, there's two organizations in particular that I'm sure that are just rejoicing, and that is the Washington Post and the New York Times. I'm not sure how they could have survived without the President Trump and them being able to write about what he is talking about. But specifically to your question, it is a concern. Look, we have issues down here. I think the president is making those issues, known. We had a problem in Georgia in which, the continued McConnell issues in the Senate at the end of the year gave the talking points to Warnock and Ossoff that further divided. It also lent itself to where our voters were very frustrated with the Republicans currently in office, and they said, well, if it doesn't matter, why should we go vote for David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler? And we saw that happen. I'm very frustrated with conservative voters who didn't turn back out. No matter what your feelings about the elections, you needed to turn back out. Otherwise, you've got no point in it. And the president's just making that clear. Look, the consent decree was a disaster. It should have never been put into place down here. But we can overcome that. Now we've got to overcome it. Otherwise, you're right. We're going to have some issues going forward.
All right. Former Congressman Doug Collins. If you're in Georgia or parts of Virginia, check him out on 1690 WMLB, the Doug Collins Show. What's the time, Doug?
We're at 3 to 4 o'clock, and we're also on the station. You can look us up, and we can download, listen live wherever you're at in the country.
All right. Congratulations, and thank you for being with us.
Tom, we appreciate it. Y'all have a great day.
Hi, Emma Reckenberg here. If you like this video, there's a whole lot more to see on Newsmax TV. You can watch for free right here on our YouTube live stream and be the first one here each time our experts break down real news. Just hit that subscribe button, ring the bell icon, and stay with us on America's fastest growing cable news channel, Newsmax TV.